Sue Stockdale, and welcome to another episode of Access to Inspiration. Today I'm speaking to Laurel Herman, who has more than 50 years of experience to share with us. Laurel is acknowledged as an international expert in every aspect of personal effectiveness. Her start as an entrepreneur came over 50 years ago when she advertised her used designer pregnancy clothes for sale in the Lady magazine. From these humble beginnings, and with no intention of ever running a business, Lauren pioneered the idea of concept shopping, and over the next 20 years became known as the go-to person for the great and the good, where she styled their appearance and helped them with image and clothes advice. Her clients include male and female leaders of top law practices, consulting firms and corporate organisations worldwide, and many private clients too. Her confidentiality, discretion and down-to-earth practical advice has been listened to by many powerful and successful people when they are considering what to wear to impress and how to present themselves. More recently, after one of her sons was diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 30, she has turned her attention to setting up Aspirations, an organisation aimed at bringing together organisations and people with Asperger's. It acts as a catalyst to help business see that there's a pool of talent perhaps they're not tapping into, and together with those in the spectrum, being able to connect them and work in those organisations. I'm fascinated to learn from you, Laurel. You've been successful with a number of your different initiatives over the years, including your more recent one, or Aspirations, which I'll get onto later on. You've got such a wealth of knowledge and experience about personal effectiveness. I wonder how it all began. Where did your story start?
I actually think that my story probably started when I was very young, because I now realise that I was highly intuitive. The things that when I'm even working with a client now, I suddenly think, how should I know that? And I realised that even maybe as a little girl, certain things were striking me about life and about people. So it started very, very early, but I never intended ever to be in business. I have to say that girls like me, of my age, it wasn't the thing you did. My mum had never worked. I was academic at school. If you ask people, they will say, Laura won all the prizes. I didn't win all the prizes, but somehow there's an image of that. And really, because of that, I think when I reflect on it, really, I didn't need to prove anything. I studied statistics, met the man who I fell in love with when I was 16, and all I wanted to do was really get married and have a family. I did get married, and I had my first 2 children by the time I was 22. At that time, there was never any intention of doing anything at all. And the reason for that is quite interesting, again, in reflection. My father was in a business which depended on the buyers from big corporations buying the things he sold. And I used to be in his office, and I used to listen to the buyers, and remember, he depended on that. They were big buyers in every sense of the word, and they would look at something, fingering through a magazine and said, oh, I like that handbag, knowing full well he had to go and get his secretary to go out and buy the handbag. And I remember sitting there thinking, how can anybody be like her? Right? But it was our livelihood. In fact, I had to have 4 of them at my wedding, and all 4 from different companies never bought me a wedding present. I didn't need the wedding present. You see, again, looking back, I was 20, but I couldn't understand how people could do that. But had they not been invited to the wedding, he would have lost the contracts. So that was in my mind. That's what business women were like. Yeah. And there was no way I ever wanted to be in business, right? And it's really interesting because that stayed with me for a long time. So after the birth of my second son, which was very soon after the first one, I wanted to get rid of my maternity clothes, which in today's world would have been called designer. But in fact, there wasn't such a term then. I advertised them in the Lady magazine, and I advertised my maternity clothes. A lady from Northern Ireland, from Coleraine, answered the advert, bought my maternity clothes, asked me if I had any non-preggy clothes, which I had from, obviously, for the children. And I sent them over to her, and she bought the lot. At which point she asked me, all my friends are so jealous because we can't get good clothes over here. So I had a very stylish mum and grandma, and I put their clothes in a box and sent them over to Coleraine, and her friends bought the lot. I put this other advert in saying, group of friends have got clothes for sale. I do not know why I did it, and I forgot I'd done it. And one day I came home, and my grandmother said to me, what have you done? We've had phone calls from all over the British Isles wanting your clothes. Now, I remember that as if it was yesterday. And I realise now, which I didn't then, how resourceful I am, and I phoned all these very nice ladies back and said, I'm really sorry, the advert came out a couple of weeks, leave it to me, I'll do something. And I was very shy. I led a very sheltered life. I didn't know how to speak to people I'd never met at all. At that point, I did have friends who were beginning to buy good clothes. It was the beginning of the French and Italian clothes. I spoke to all of them and got them to put their cast-off clothes together. Now, again, the funny bit about this is when I actually got married, it was the era of Courrèges. Short, A-line, lovely clothes, very straight, like a little bit that had been shown the geometric look. While I was pregnant for the whole 2.5, 3 years that I was, as it were, middies came in with waistlines. And I couldn't bear it because I put on 3.5 stone for each of my children. So when I went to sell my friends' clothes, they were all the minis. I didn't even realise this till much later on. Actually, what I did was selling by mail order to all these ladies around the country. And I put all the things in a parcel, send them off, and they sent half back or whatever. And I loved it. It was a hobby. So while I did this, I had my 2 little boys playing on the floor because they were very good. I'd do my parcels, send them off, and that was it. That went on for some time. And then a lady from Saffron Walden phoned me up and said, "You've done so well by me and you've never met me. My cousin, who's going to be a Lady Mayor of Enfield, Mrs. Emberston, she wants to come and see you." Absolutely not. In my home, right? I mean, there was no way. Well, of course, I gave in eventually, and she came, and then she brought her counsellors, and so it went on. I put that advert in, and then continued to put some adverts in, saying I had clothes for sale. And so over years, I actually saw people in my home. And I remember I had somebody from Buckingham Palace. I remember going to the Royal News, actually, to dress, all kinds of things. And that was actually the beginning of my work in the corporate world.
I'm imagining you weren't calling it work in your head.
I certainly wasn't calling it business at all. And then what actually happened was Jean Denton was headhunted to come to London in a corporate role. And she actually met the wife of the CEO, who happened to be very, very smart. And I don't know if you remember what Jean looked like, but she didn't wear any makeup. She had shapeless clothes. And Jean heard about me. She put 2 and 2 together and thought I was selling the CEO's wife's clothes because she was from this area. And Jean told me this later, and Jean came to see me. I dressed her. She didn't know. She thought she was wearing the CEO's wife's clothes. Not that I ever said that. She actually was wearing my own. So every time she was on television, I saw her in something I had bought. But what was interesting, she brought all her friends here to see me, right? Because she was generous. You see, what she felt, she looked good, she wanted them. And that was very much for me. I have got customers who wouldn't dream of telling anyone in case someone might buy a dress that they look good in, right? But that was Jean, and that's how it went on. So that was my introduction into the business corporate world. And then things started. I got a lot of attention, and I really became, I suppose, the first image consultant. So I was the go-to person for all kinds of things to do with women, clothes, for work. It was the beginning of designer clothes and awareness of looking good. It was the time that people would start to want to look good. And like when I was on television, people would say, "How did you get those clothes?" You know, and I'd say, "Well, they're from..." This was a marketing tool, but I didn't realise that wasn't my language because we never advertised. It was all kept very discreet. And eventually, we took premises and it became concept shopping. And I had to admit, it was a business. I'm still very resistant to being a businesswoman because I don't think I am a businesswoman. I just think I'm very good at what I do. I really do think.
Do you think that that relates back to the sense that you had of those business people that were buyers that worked with your father?
The stigma, but also now I'm in the big business world and I realise that it's not my bag, you know, balance sheets and all that kind of thing. Of course I understand, I'm not stupid, but it's not what gives me the buzz. The buzz is kind of people and what I get from that. So concept shopping actually went from strength to strength because the women who began to hear about us weren't all working women, but most of them were, and there wasn't anything available. We were their introduction to French clothes, Italian clothes, even trouser suits. I remember the first time anyone bought trouser suits, she thought she had done something unbelievable. Even she's still a customer of mine and we laugh about it. So that went on for all those years. In that time, many opportunities were being presented to me, even putting my name to arrange for Marks and Spencer. But my husband wasn't happy. I knew he wasn't happy. And so I turned everything down because my husband and my children and my family life were most important to me. Sadly, my marriage ended very painfully, very acrimoniously after 30 years. And my whole life was blown apart. My husband, my white knight in shining armour, left me with debt and also screwed me in the divorce, which was when I realised how much money I'd earned because now it was challenged. So I had to get through that. And what I haven't added, my husband was actually only my second boyfriend. So everyone said to me, "Oh, you're a successful businesswoman, you'll be fine." I wasn't fine at all. I had never been single. I'd had one boyfriend before my husband for 7 years. So It was really the most terrible time. But like everything else, you learn a lot. And I found how strong I was. The inner resources I had, which I didn't want to find, but I did. And the fact that the infrastructure, what I'd built, actually helped me through it.
And I also imagine that you had a great deal of support from your customers, just as women generally tend to be supportive of one another. Did that also help you?
You're right, absolutely. But that came about because as I was getting through this divorce, and it was really horrible, I realised at that point, this is 20 years ago, that divorce was really a subject people didn't talk about. It's not like today when you pick up a newspaper and there's always kind of an oligarch's wife or a footballer's wife and about the settlement. Nobody talked about it. And I realised that I was getting through because of my family, because of the support of people here. And I realised that there were other people who wouldn't have that. So I found, because I'm articulate, because like you said, when I believe in something, I wanted to help those people. So I actually, because I wasn't media shy, I became a role model for divorce, survival and recover in the media. And wanted them to see that if I could get through, because I was the person crying in the corner saying I couldn't live without my husband. And I wanted people to know that. So that's when my customers realised what I was really going through. In that time, two things happened. The first one was because I was disadvantaged financially, and I knew that I hadn't just been selling clothes. I've got a brain, there was a lot of psychology in what I did. I loved it passionately. But to all intents and purposes, Laurel selling second-hand clothes, which was not the truth. And I walked in one day, I said, I'm starting Positive Presence. Now, I'd been so disparaging about image consultant. They said, what is that? I said, an image consultancy. I said,
your words.
But it's not like that. And I couldn't explain it because it was going to be something different. And what actually happened was my clients from Concept Shopping, by that time, were women who'd gone right up the top of the tree. And when they heard that I was starting Positive Presence, they said, wow, fantastic. You've done me so well by me and you've never abused your connections. I'm going to introduce you. And I will tell you, within a few weeks, I was taking shopping, the managing partner of Clifford Chance, managing partner of PwC, the managing partner of Arthur Andersen, the chairman of Deloitte, etc., which I now can talk about. All men, not together, I have to tell you, all separate. In fact, only one of them actually admitted it. I always think of when they were round at the World Economic Forum, they were all wearing clothes that I'd gone shopping with, and none of them realised that they all came from the same place. When I went shopping, and I don't know how I had the audacity to do it, I'd only ever taken my husband or my 3 sons shopping. I'd never taken another man shopping. But I think I must have been good at it because I loved it. And in fact, each one said, great, we want you to come into the companies and make our executives look good. So again, it was timing. It was the beginning of people accepting that it wasn't too superficial. If someone like I did it, because I'm not a lightweight and I don't think looking good is the most important thing in the world, I then started to go into these companies. That's where Positive Presence really began. But very, very soon, I realised that there was so much more in me that hadn't really been allowed to come out. And that was from my intuitive side. And so Positive Presence moved very quickly to where it's been for a long time and evolved to where it is today, which is really working on present. Every element is there, personal effectiveness. Yes, how you look, but far more important, or with more weight, is how you sound, how you behave. And there's a great deal around behaviour. So that became international, working with teams, with groups, and with men. I suppose a lot of it was with professional service firms and professional people. And looking back, and I don't mean this in a conceited way, I think I became known for my discretion, my connections, perceived wisdom, experience, whatever it is, and understanding people and trustworthiness. And so I was very lucky that several accountants and lawyers and people like that actually introduced me to their clients, which is quite something because they don't normally, who had problems. I know it sounds funny because there could be anything to do with their personal or working life, but they knew that I'm Mrs. Common Sense, which is what I am, I think. So PP Privé, which is the private client practice, grew up dealing with anything. And that's the only way I can say it, dealing with anything or helping people deal with anything. And then aspirations.
So tell us about that, because I think that's got something that's very close to your heart with your family.
They're all close to my heart, and I've realised that because they're all helping people with what I would say problems they didn't know they had come to sometimes. What actually happened 20 years ago, my perception of autism, if I had a perception, was either Rain Man or a child knocking its head on the floor in a supermarket having a meltdown. I don't even know if I had a perception because it didn't touch my world. One of my sons was diagnosed with Asperger's at the age of 30. Now, looking back at that time, I live in Hampstead, which I always tell people is the psycho capital of the world. If you want your goldfish psychoanalysed, you bring it to Hampstead because there will be a shrink in Hampstead who will do it. We've got the Tabby Institute, Freud. My doctor'd never heard of Asperger's. I'd never heard of Asperger's. I'm savvy, I'm out there in the world. We couldn't get him diagnosed. We had to take him to Cambridge. So that tells you in 20 years what has happened. But it was a great shock for me, seen as this expert in behaviour and communication, to think I had an autistic child because of my perception of the word autistic. How could I not have realised? Because he looks like you and I. So I had to come to terms that we had to do a lot of soul searching going back over years with the family. It was a really difficult time. At that point, and again it's a long time ago, because I knew nothing, I started going to conferences to find out more about autism. And I started to then realise what it was all about. I now know there were a lot of people like me on the same journey, because actually Asperger's had only been given a name in about 1995, this high functioning, where people who just were a little bit different, a little bit odd, a little bit quirky, eccentric, whatever word you want to put to it, probably didn't have great social skills, that they had a different way of thinking. And what I began to realise, Sue, was quite interesting, that some of the people being sent to me, top executives, actually presented that way of thinking. So the analogies, they didn't get the analogy. They said, well, give me a rule, Laurel. Well, there wasn't a rule, actually, to what I was saying, but I could see that's how they were thinking.
You had seen that behaviour then in some of your clients?
Well, I began to learn, because I was learning about autism and this kind of thing. And as I then began to talk about that, because I'm interested in life and people, to other people, more and more people, not knowing I had anything to do with autism, actually started telling me their own stories. And I began to realise, as I opened the conversation, how many people in the world that I work in actually have a connection through children, through partners, male partners particularly, through siblings, whatever, even parents, and definitely colleagues. And the more I talked about it, the more I began to realise, my goodness, why isn't anyone actually realising this except me? What was really important to me was that because I didn't know anyone with Asperger's, when someone said they had a son, I said, oh great, what is he doing? Oh, he's got a PhD, whatever. Yeah? And then their face would fall, because actually they start telling me he was in the post room, he was at home with depression, all kinds of sad things. I didn't hear a happy story. I began to realise what is going on here. These are people who are quite able. And I could see in my own son. Society didn't accept them, so society didn't accept anything that was slightly different, and awful things happened. Now, what I've now realised, which is an interesting, I suppose, that you call these light bulb moments in your life, because it's an invisible difference, it's only actually discovered when something goes wrong. If you have a child that has a disability, you know and you deal with it. But if you don't, so when things go wrong, and then it's discovered by either a doctor or a teacher or whatever, already other problems have come, because the person themselves with this different way of thinking has a different lens on life. I know that now. Therefore, they actually see the world differently, but they don't understand why the world isn't understanding them. And therefore you get the depression, the breakdown, drink and drug dependency and crime. All the hackers of the world have got Asperger's. Why didn't somebody put them in MI5 instead of putting them in prison? Right? And then suicide. There's a very 15% suicidal tendencies. And the more I felt about this, because I worked in big organisations, I began to understand that actually the recruitment process was daunting to people on the spectrum, that often they wouldn't apply at all, or if they did apply, they never got in. And if they did get in by default, and years ago they would have done, what often happened was, because of unusual behaviour, very often, eventually, people didn't tolerate it for some reason. And then it was what I call the slippery spiral down, probably never to work again. And the more I heard that, because people began to give me stories, the more I knew something had to be done. So being the interminable Mrs. Fix-It, who comes up with practical solutions, I decided I wasn't going to start a charity, because to me, a charity means, because of my work in the corporate world, you go and you say, please do this to help us. You come from the point of, these are disadvantaged people. I was too proud and have got too much dignity, which is just the same as my work, I suppose, right the way through. And I did something different. I said, this is a business case, because at the end of the day, it's money that makes the world turn around. I don't see that as a bad thing. So I got the great and the good round a table, many of whom were parents of people with Asperger's, or people who were good people who realised something had to be done, or enlightened people who realised there was going to be a skill shortage. and they could see this as a hidden pool of talent. And I said exactly that. I'm not Mother Teresa. I'm not here to change the world, but you're missing actually something that would really help. This is a business case. There's a hidden pool of talent that you could use. And they listened, and Aspirations was born. In 2017, we became a CIC, which is a community interest company, because we wanted to be seen by business as actually being business-led and not ask them to do things that they didn't want to do or couldn't do. And so we've moved from there to where we are today.
So you've had a real amazing career there, and I guess the things that are really striking me that come out is your ability to be opportunistic, to observe connections and patterns that other people aren't seeing.
Which is interesting because that's what an autistic mind is, and I've learned not autistic. I'm so neurotypical that it's actually very difficult sometimes for me with people who are on the spectrum. But yes, I do see patterns, and I realise that without knowing I'm seeing them. And I do see opportunities, and I don't necessarily mean in a business sense, but somebody's got to do something.
So that desire to help, the fascination for people has really driven you to take action and make things happen over your career.
In a way that I believe is going to work, because part of Aspirations is balancing the needs and expectations of business, but also the community. In other words, the community would really probably like lots of things in an ideal world, and business probably doesn't want to give anything in an ideal world because it costs money. But if you can balance that, that's what we do.
You're a catalyst to bring together business that can see there's a pool of talent perhaps they're not tapping into, and those on the spectrum that actually want to work in those organisations and maximise their potential.
Or might even not know they want to work in the organisation, because very often they don't know. This is the thing. Because they don't know their career prospect. They don't know because they're seeing the world differently. So yes, bringing them together to everyone's advantage, because there is a great advantage to be had if people understand that the way to do it. And that it's very important, it's the way to do it.
So for any of the listeners to this podcast who perhaps may be those people that are on the spectrum, that have been identified as such, what could they do? Can they be part of the organisation? Do they get support? How would they take it forward, knowing now
about it?
So what
has actually happened over the first few years? We've worked very hard with organisations to open doors and to actually build revenue, because we need money. We don't have any funding. We believe that organisations, in order to attract, to recruit and retain and grow autistic talent, have to be ready to do so. Otherwise, it's probably not going to work. So our work has been primarily on that side, because that brings us revenue with the enlightened organisation. So we've done some fantastic work. Meanwhile, we've been working with people who are on the spectrum who approach us, and we've been doing that pro bono to help them, because we can't ask them if they're not in work to pay. But we cannot continue because we're actually now being approached almost every day by somebody. So at the moment we're building a very interesting comprehensive model of a development programme for people on the spectrum. This programme is being developed at this very moment by our psychologists and by business leaders putting it together, and the autistic voice as well, because that's everything we do has those three voices. And that has to go out for funding, and that's our next thing, to try and get proper funding so we can really roll that out, because it's so needed.
So it's been really brilliant to hear your journey in your career, all the different activities that you've done. Looking back on that career of almost 50 years, what have you learned about you during that time?
I would say that nothing is wasted. So when one thinks that something has gone wrong, like people are made redundant, my work is to inspire them and make them realise, I know it's lovely to use the cliche, everything happens for a reason, but I believe it does. It might be a difficult time, but you'll get through it. You have to be resilient. You have to know that you will get through, and that you have to look at the positive bits along it. So I think it's all learning, and to use every part of it. So that for me has been what has happened. And my journey, when I look back, is all connected. I didn't realise it at the time, but each bit has added something to what's happening next.
Wise words, Laurel Herman. Thank you so much for your time today.